This caper sounds like it was inspired by a movie, or maybe it's so absurd it was inspired by a cartoon. Look right over there. You can see it now opened up, but that was the tunnel that the FBI opened up, and they found it. This morning, the FBI in Florida is digging for answers after discovering a tunnel leading to treasure.
This is truly a unique case here.
Agents say a call to a road crew about a sinkhole in Pembroke Pines led to a tunnel at least 50 yards long. Near the entrance in the woods, a pair of boots, a generator, a rope, and a wagon.
So now they're coming in by land, and even the land is concerned because I told them that's going to be next. You know, the land is going to be next, and we may go to the Senate, we may go to the, Congress, and we're going to definitely, I'd like to just tell you, let's go. We go. We're going to tell them what we're going to do, and I think they're going to probably like it, except...
It started at 1:43 a.m. That was the first moment the motion sensors tripped beneath the south maintenance corridor near the edge of the Army base. Above ground, everything looked normal. Floodlights washed over chain link fencing. Guard towers stood still against the night sky. A dry wind moved across the outer service road, carrying dust and the low mechanical hum of distant generators. Most of the base was asleep. A few late-shift vehicles rolled through designated lanes. Nothing in the open suggested that just below the surface, one of the most explosive cartel smuggling discoveries in years was about to break wide open. Then the convoy arrived. 3 black federal SUVs entered through a restricted access point. A tactical truck followed behind. 2 more vehicles peeled off toward the southern perimeter, where engineers and federal narcotics teams had been quietly monitoring unusual underground activity for weeks. By 1:49 a.m., the Operation Command Post was active. By 1:52 a.m., the outer perimeter around the suspected tunnel zone was sealed. By 1:55 a.m., military police had been ordered to hold position and allow federal teams to take lead control. No alarms were sounded across the base, no loud public warnings, no panic, only hushed radio traffic, coded instructions, and agents moving quickly through dark service lanes with the kind of urgency that comes when everyone involved knows the next 30 minutes could decide whether evidence is preserved or buried forever. At 1:58 a.m., the first ground-penetrating scan team moved into position. At 2:03 a.m., a maintenance hatch near an abandoned utility shed was forced open. At 2:06 a.m., agents dropped into a narrow access chamber, concealed beneath what looked, on the surface, like a routine storage slab near the edge of the base's logistics zone. What they found below changed everything. There was air ventilation, there were power cables, there were reinforced walls. And stretching away into darkness was a tunnel, professionally cut, structurally braced, and large enough to move bulk loads through in silence. This was not some improvised escape shaft. This was infrastructure. By 2:11 a.m., the tunnel was confirmed active. By 2:15 a.m., a second entry team followed the passage deeper underground. By 2:19 a.m., they found rail guides and wheeled cargo platforms built to move heavy loads efficiently through the earth. At 2:24 a.m., the first narcotics bundles were recovered. At 2:27 a.m., the command vehicle above ground received the message that instantly transformed the operation from a sensitive military corruption probe into a national-level cartel scandal. The tunnel ran under a U.S. Army base. Not beside it, not near it, under it. And if the early evidence was right, cartel smugglers had been using subterranean routes below protected military land, while compromised personnel on the base helped keep the pathway clear. By 2:33 a.m., another team was moving toward on-base barracks tied to 2 soldiers already under internal suspicion. By 2:37 a.m., the first detained service member was pulled from his room in silence and handcuffed before most of his unit even understood what was happening. By 2:41 a.m., encrypted phones, cash bundles, and access logs were being seized from 2 separate quarters. By 2:48 a.m., investigators had begun saying the words that would define the case: soldiers bribed, not civilians with temporary badges, not contractors slipping through weak oversight, active duty soldiers accused of helping a cartel tunnel operate under the protected footprint of an American military installation. At 2:56 a.m., the second tunnel branch was discovered. This one was narrower, but better concealed, with false earth panels, drainage support, and built-in lighting timed to portable battery systems. Deeper inside, investigators found more bundled narcotics, coded shipment markers, and evidence that the tunnel had not been used once or twice in desperation. It had been used repeatedly. By 3:04 a.m., the seizure estimate started climbing. Hundreds of kilograms became thousands. By 3:18 a.m., cargo count teams were still hauling packages from underground staging sections. By 3:27 a.m., the number was relayed upward through the chain. 4.2 tons seized. That was the amount recovered from the tunnel complex and connected transfer points in the first phase of the raid. 4.2 tons. Enough to turn the operation from an already shocking infiltration case into one of the largest cartel tunnel seizures ever linked to a military-adjacent route. By 3:39 a.m., daylight was still hours away, but the base no longer felt like a secure installation. It felt like a compromised zone. That was the morning the scandal exploded. But the story had started much earlier, months before the raid, when small irregularities began surfacing around the southern logistics boundary. At first, it looked like nothing. A few strange vibration readings, minor anomalies in subsurface maintenance scans, a service road camera going offline at odd hours, patrol timing reports that didn't line up cleanly. Then came something more troubling. Certain perimeter observation windows kept producing the same dead zones. Brief stretches when visibility, movement logs, and sensor consistency all seemed to bend just enough to create uncertainty. Not enough to trigger immediate panic, but enough to irritate the analysts reviewing base security systems. Someone somewhere seemed to understand exactly how long a blind patch could last before it started looking intentional. Then the narcotics side of the investigation entered the picture. DEA-linked intelligence had already been examining a trafficking network believed to be shifting away from obvious border routes and toward highly protected corridors where suspicion would be least expected. Loads kept disappearing from known cartel staging patterns, only to reappear deeper inside the distribution chain with no clear crossing record. At first, investigators assumed the traffickers were using private land, drainage systems, or commercial concealment corridors. But one geographic pattern kept surfacing. The loads seemed to bypass scrutiny near a zone nobody wanted to consider, the base perimeter. That possibility sounded absurd at first. Cartels exploit weak places, not hardened military ground. But that assumption is exactly what made the route so powerful, if it was real. So federal investigators and select military counterintelligence personnel began working in silence, quietly, carefully. Because if the suspicion was true, a leak on the wrong day could collapse the case and bury the evidence, literally. They reviewed subsurface imagery, they mapped old utility corridors, they compared maintenance access patterns with off-base movement, they studied which personnel had repeated, unexplained presence near low-traffic areas along the southern edge. That was when names began surfacing. Soldiers with financial inconsistencies, soldiers with unexplained cash, soldiers whose access card logs showed odd late-night movement near non-essential service lanes. Nothing dramatic at first, just patterns, small ones. But in corruption cases, patterns are where betrayal starts showing its face. One soldier had deposits no junior enlisted salary could explain. Another had recently paid off personal debt in a way that triggered quiet questions. A third had been communicating through apps that disappeared almost as quickly as they were installed. Separately, they looked like discipline issues or personal irregularities. Together, they began to resemble compromise. Investigators would later come to believe the soldiers were not tunnel engineers and not cartel masterminds. Their value was simpler and therefore more dangerous. They knew routines, they knew patrol timing, they knew where service zones were quiet, they knew which cameras mattered, which reports got reviewed slowly, which sectors drew less traffic, and how long an unofficial gap could exist before someone asked questions. That is all a cartel needs from inside a protected zone. Not genius, not ideology, just access sold in pieces. The tunnel itself appeared to be a professional operation. Reinforced sections, ventilation support, drainage planning, cargo movement rails, concealment architecture. This was not dug by amateurs with shovels and luck. It had money behind it, technical supervision, and the kind of patience only a high-value trafficking corridor justifies. And that made the military angle even more disturbing, because a tunnel of that quality does not merely rely on dirt and darkness. It relies on confidence. Confidence that nobody above will see it in time. Confidence that the people closest to the ground will keep quiet. Confidence that the most protected land is also the least questioned. That was the real genius of the route. The cartel had not just found a way under the border, it had found a way under trust itself. Publicly, the soldiers later tied to the case looked ordinary, uniformed, disciplined. Young men serving on a U.S. Army base in a region where the pressure of border enforcement, trafficking intelligence, and military infrastructure all existed uncomfortably close together. No one looking at a formation line would know which faces had allegedly taken money. No one walking through the barracks would know who had turned classified routine into smuggling opportunity. But investigators believed that was precisely how the corridor stayed alive. The cartel did not need battalion-level corruption. It needed a few compromised people near the right fence, at the right hour, in the right silence. According to the case theory, those soldiers helped in several ways: reducing scrutiny near sensitive sections, timing movement windows, sharing knowledge about patrol gaps, and ensuring certain activity near maintenance zones did not trigger urgent response. They were not moving 4.2 tons on their backs. They were making sure the system meant to detect the movement stayed just blind enough for others to do the work. And that is what made the case so devastating. Not just that drugs crossed, but that military protection may have been quietly rented by traffickers. The first real break reportedly came when underground acoustic anomalies lined up with suspicious personnel movement on the same nights. A pattern that once looked like random mechanical noise began to look rhythmic, intentional. Soon after, hidden camera placements near the southern service corridor showed brief, repeated activity at hours when nobody should have been there. Then came thermal irregularities in the soil. Then a maintenance hatch that seemed too recently disturbed. Then the covert scans that showed hollow sections beneath ground no one had officially excavated. Once investigators had that, the raid became inevitable. Because if a cartel tunnel really ran under Army land, every day of delay meant more product moving, more evidence shifting, and more time for compromised insiders to clean up their part of the trail. That is why the operation came in darkness. Why barracks were hit quietly. Why military police were told to hold back. Why the tunnel teams moved fast. By sunrise, the scandal was already spiraling outward. Command staff were scrambling to understand the scope. Were only a few soldiers involved? Had supervisors missed warning signs? Did any civilians on base know? Were contractors part of the logistics chain? How many previous loads had moved through the tunnel before the 4.2 tons now sitting in evidence? Because that is the thing about a seizure of this size. It is never the whole story. It is the load that got caught. And once people understand that, the real question becomes terrifying. If 4.2 tons were seized in one operation, how much had already passed? The political and symbolic fallout hit immediately. Army bases are not just pieces of land. They are national trust zones. They represent discipline, order, defense, and sacrifice. To hear that cartel tunnels may have operated beneath one, with soldiers allegedly bribed into cooperation, strikes at something deeper than a trafficking headline. It suggests not merely a border vulnerability, but an institutional one. It tells the public that criminal organizations are no longer just testing fences and patrols. They are studying systems, recruiting insiders, buying silence, building beneath the feet of people who were supposed to stop them. That is why the betrayal mattered as much as the narcotics. For honest service members, it was poison. The idea that fellow soldiers might have sold access to traffickers cut directly against the culture of duty and trust. Bases run on reliability. Orders matter because the person next to you is supposed to mean what he says. Once that confidence cracks, even for a small group, the damage runs far beyond one criminal case. Every unusual movement gets re-examined. Every unexplained absence feels suspicious. Every late-night maintenance check looks different in hindsight. And the cartel understands the value of that chaos. Smugglers do not merely profit from physical routes. They profit from damaged confidence. The more institutions doubt themselves, the easier the next compromise becomes. By midday, evidence teams were still cataloging recovered narcotics, tunnel hardware, devices, money, and access records. Engineers were mapping the full underground route. Counterintelligence units were tracing communications between the soldiers and suspected cartel intermediaries. Financial investigators were pulling apart deposits, cash handling, gift purchases, debt payments, and contact chains. Search warrants were widening. More names were surfacing. Some appeared to be peripheral, others looked more central. The fear now was obvious. Was this a contained betrayal, or the visible edge of a larger corruption channel running through military and civilian networks alike? Because tunnels of this sophistication do not live on one bribe alone. They require coordination on both sides. Digging teams, transport teams, receiving crews, warehouse handlers, money people, communicators. And on the protected side, at least a few insiders who understand exactly how much silence is worth. That was the hidden architecture investigators were now trying to expose. And as the hours passed, the tunnel changed in public imagination, from a criminal route into something almost cinematic in its audacity. Cartel engineers burrowing beneath an army base while compromised soldiers above helped preserve the illusion that the ground was solid, secure, and ordinary. But there was nothing ordinary about it. Not the reinforced walls, not the cargo rails, not the ventilation, not the 4.2 tons seized, not the uniforms hanging in barracks while federal agents carried evidence boxes past them before dawn. At 1:43 a.m., the base still looked like hardened military ground. By 2:27 a.m., agents had confirmed a live cartel tunnel running beneath it. By 3:27 a.m., the seizure total had climbed to 4.2 tons. And by the end of the operation, the story was no longer just about drugs or dirt or hidden engineering. It was about betrayal from underneath, a cartel route built below American military land, soldiers accused of taking bribes to help keep it open, and a federal raid that finally brought the whole buried system into the light. The drugs were seized, the tunnel was exposed, the soldiers were in custody. But one question remained hanging over the base long after sunrise. How many shipments passed under American boots before anyone realized the ground had already been sold?